Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Rattiner from Dan's Papers, and I'm the referee, I guess, is one way to look at it. We're going to have a pre-judging event, which you'll see in your programs, which consists of an interview that Eric Feil, the CEO of Dan's Papers, is going to do with Anthony Sosinski and John Aldridge. I don't know if any of you know them. They're local Montauk fishermen, and one night John, while the boat was on automatic, was out doing something on the deck and fell off the boat. His partner on the boat didn't know he had fallen off until morning. And the result of this was an incredible search, resulting in them writing a book. And that is now going to result in a movie, which is going to be coming out, we believe, later this fall or early next spring, by the Weinstein brothers, called A Speck in the Sea. You can see the image of the book on here. Because it's a couple of local guys, and all this is happening to them, we thought it might be very interesting to feature them. Also, as a result of this, singer Nancy Atlas, who's a good friend of theirs, wrote a song about them, and we're going to start this afternoon off. She'll be coming on out and doing a song called The Tale of Johnny Load. Load was his nickname. And here she is. Nancy, you want to come out?
Good afternoon, everybody. How you doing? Johnny and Anthony are good friends of mine, and so I decided to try and write a sea shanty for them to commemorate their ordeal. And I have to say, the first 8 months, it was unbearable. It was one of the worst songs I had ever written. And I finally decided I was going to give up and that I was not going to write the song at all. It was like a bad version of Chris Christopherson's Sailing Away. And then about 3 weeks later, in a twilight that was, I was putting my youngest daughter to bed, the chorus of this song kind of came through me, and I realized immediately that I had something to work with. And it's just been a real honor to write something that commemorates them, but also the biggest accomplishment has been that Johnny and Anthony really love it. So I'm going to play a version of it today that it has the first verse is not on the recording. We recorded it with Cynthia Daniels and Chad Smith of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, but this version's acoustic. So without further ado, this is called The Tale of Johnny Load. What runs through your head when you think that you're dead, when you think that you're going to die? Who will you miss? Who was your last kiss? And did you tell your mother goodbye? Do you sink? Do you swim when the demons rush in? Do you lay down the dagger and die? Were you free or a slave? Did you live your life brave? Well, Anthony woke up in the morning to do docking gear and get ice. By 9 in the evening, he'd worked 16 hours, not counting the 4 spent at liars. Johnny came ready, able and steady. He said, man, the first shift's on me. Go catch fisherman lost out at sea, and he's counting on you and the Montauk crew to bring him back to his Anna Mary. There's a scent in the slick, and the sharks come on quick, so you better play dead to survive. Lock your eyes on the fins, let your body fall limp, but keep a murderous grip on your knife. Stay alive till the sun alerts everyone that you're just a speck in the sea. And whatever you do, hold on to your boots. They'll be praying down at St. Therese. They'll say, hey, ho, say Johnny Lord. He's a fisherman lost out at sea. He's counting on you and the Montauk crew to bring him back to his Anna Mary. 'Cause the ocean's your mother, your bitch and your lover, and nobody gets to ride free. It's a roll of the dice if she'll let you survive. So bow down, boys, to the queen. Are you still with me? Oh, now Anthony woke, saw that the handle had broke, and his head and his heart went on fire. Johnny, he screamed, brother, where can you be? Jesus, man, I hope you're alive. And the fleet soon amassed, crisscrossing in patterns. The choppers flew further offshore, and Johnny could hear that the boats were so near, but nobody saw him at all. Da-da-da-da, 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 da-da-da-da. Now the days come to pass, and the flags at half a mast, and the sun, well, it's starting to drown. And little Anthony says that it's full steam ahead. I'm not going in till he's found. And it's the chopper's last pass, and he's barely got gas, but he's going out past his last call. Then the radio cracks, there's something to track. See you, Mark! Mark, Mark! Anna Mary, we have you now. He's alive. He's alive. 'Cause the ocean's your mother, your bitch and your lover, and nobody gets to ride free. It's a roll of the dice if she'll let you survive. So bow down, boys, to the queen. Everybody today, oh, they saved Captain Lord. He fell overboard in the night. 15 north of the canyon, the moon's his companion with only his boots and a knife. They said, hey, oh, they saved Captain Lord. He was a fisherman lost out at sea, but he counted on you and the Montauk crew. You brought him back to his Anna Mary. Oh, you brought him back to his Anna Mary. Oh, you brought him back to his Anna Mary.
Thank you.
And now I'd like to introduce Anthony Sosinski, John Aldridge and Eric Vile, who will interview them. And the title of this is So What Happened?
So if everybody here is not either covered in chills, crying, something, then I don't know. We have to go to the emotional clinic at Southampton Hospital, because hearing Nancy sing that, I don't know how many of you have read the book, but I highly recommend it. You know, it's a great story when you know the ending and you're still turning every single page. It's fabulous. So ladies and gentlemen, John Aldridge, Anthony Sosinski, he's alive.
Good to be alive. Good to be alive.
So what is it like for you guys hearing that song? I mean, I was standing backstage with you, trying to gauge your emotions, but you're very, it's tough to read, very poker face there.
It's hard not to cry every time.
It's moving.
Oh yeah, it's
moving.
It's unbelievable. It says it all. You know, it has a feeling that really puts into words.
Now, did you tell these guys you were working on it? Did they know this was in progress? Did they hear it for the first time? Surprised?
No, it was wild because I do a Wednesday for almost 10 years now at the Surf Lodge. And I had worked on, I remember it was June 26th for some reason, and I had finished the song that morning. And as a rule, I usually don't really talk about songs or play them. I don't bounce things off people. I'm a solitary writer. So it's kind of like a jinx to play it for me. And I had finished it that morning. And they both showed up at that show, unbeknownst. And I do remember I went up to you and I said,
like, I can't believe you're here."
I can't believe you're here. I finished the song this morning and I would love to play it for you, because I was very sensitive to you were still, understandably processing a lot of stuff. So I was concerned. And I'll tell you, I have never in my life had a reaction that day. First of all, people were talking and everything hushed down, and there were grown men openly weeping. It really has touched a chord somewhere in, I think, the community, not just a man or a woman, but just that we are a community and that we did shut down and that we looked out for each other. That's what makes this book so phenomenal. No. It really you get that, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it really is an amazing thing. This is the middle of the height of the season when this happened. I mean, Montauk probably could not have been busier. And, Anthony, you were there, during being part of the search. Nancy, you were there on land. John, you were there hoping somebody knows where I am.
Does anybody know I'm missing?
And yeah, if you could talk about what was it like when, as the community, you said, shut down and came together.
Well, I just want to thank everybody that's here for coming and supporting this and for supporting us here today. And I had a sneak preview on this song. Her son, Levon, sung a couple of verses on the beach.
That rat.
And we were cracking crab claws, and the kids started singing, "Hey ho, save Johnny Load," and she's like, "Shh." But the community has, everybody gets lost when you don't live in a small town, and we actually live in a small town. So our small town, by them coming together on that day, was nothing that they wouldn't have done for somebody else, but they did it for us that day. And that was the difference in my feeling was, we help people for no reason other than they need help. And that day, every single entity that could come and assist us left the dock, the Coast Guard, everything. So, that was beautiful to me.
And even boats that were out with charters, and they come back in, drop the people off, and said, "We're going to go back out now and help you in the search."
They were already paid their day's pay. They brought the people back and said, "My wife will send you a check back, or she'll rebook you, but we have other things going on. Someone's lost." On that day, Jimmy Buffett was shark fishing that day because of a shark tournament that was coming up. And our friend Paul Stern was the guide that day, and they took him, and he stood and got sunburned for 6 or 7 hours.
Looking for me.
Looking for him.
Still gotta
You
make
know, I mean, you know, I have a lot of different stories about that, because even one particular man that I took to court and sued because I had worked for him on a fishing boat, and he was a concrete mason, and he bought a fishing boat, and I sued him about the pay, which I actually won. And
Side note on that.
he didn't, we weren't really the best of friends after that. And he went that morning, he heard at first light that Johnny was lost. He went to the town dock and collected any fisherman that had a slow boat, and he brought him to the yacht club, and he got on his 56-foot Hatteras and steamed out there looking for him.
There was a lot of people sacrificed, a lot that day for me. I mean, between 3 different states of Coast Guard, assets, and then our community. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, obviously, but afterwards, I was like so blown away by how affected people I didn't even know were from that day. You know, it was very overwhelming, very humbling too.
Sure. So can you take us back, I know you've done this before, but to the night. So you're on the boat, you've left, Anthony and Mike are asleep, and here you are.
You know, we fish 60 miles from land, and it's a 9-hour ride out for us. So, you know, we rotate through the night. Anthony will sleep, and then I'll wake up. You know, he'll wake up, wake me up. You know, so we rotate through the night. That particular night, I was awake, and I was getting the boat ready for the next morning. And I had to get one of the coolers off of the hatch to get access to a tank on the boat. And as I pulled on the cooler, the handle had snapped. And I went flying out of the back of the boat with just my shorts on, my fishing boots, and a T-shirt, and my little pocket knife. You know, 2:30 in the morning, 45 miles from land. They're asleep in the front of the boat. Nobody in the world knows I'm missing. And there goes the boat away in the horizon, you know. And now, instantly, I have these birds dive bombing me. Second I hit the water, I had these birds start pecking at me and, you know, like, what is this in the ocean? There must be food if you know. And I guess I was some form of food for something, but so they started dive bombing, you know, and you're trying to swim, you're trying to stay afloat, you can't even believe you're in a situation, you're panicking. And my boots float up to the surface on my feet, and I'm backpedaling, really, and something clicked in my head, and I said, man, these boots are very buoyant. So I kick them off, and I take them off, and I empty the water out of them, and I push it back into the water, above the water, back into the water, and create an air pocket inside. And then I just put one under one arm here, and I put the other boot under the other arm, and then I didn't have to swim. I had my own makeshift life jacket. So that moment there gave me, thank you. That moment gave me time to think, because then I could assess the situation. I'm not just dying at this second, you know, because you know, you can think you could swim, but when you're in that panic mode and you can't believe you're in the middle of the ocean at night, no one knows you're there, you know, you exert all your energy right away. And I was going to drown, and the boots gave me that extra time to think, trying to figure out what's going on here. And I just started setting goals for myself, saying, all right, I got to stay alive to daylight. They're going to wake up eventually. And when they wake up, I know he's going to freak out and call the Coast Guard, you know? So I knew that was going to happen. I just had to get to that point of that. So, which, you know, who knows how long that could be. But so now I'm in the middle of the ocean, using my boots as buoyancy. And, you know, here comes 2 sharks, 15 feet away from me. They could pop right up, you know, here to the edge of the stage. And, you know, you can't even believe it. You're in such disbelief. You know, you're in the middle of the ocean freaking out to begin with, knowing that there's everything that lives here that's going to probably eat you. And then you see sharks. And you're like, oh. So I had to process that, work through that, and, you know, not freak out totally. Try to get in my own head and calm my heart rate, calm my breathing, not be scared, and really have them come check me out. And, you know, luckily, eventually they swam away, left me alone, or they just didn't appear again for me to see them. And then, you know, through the, you know, sunrise comes, and I hear a helicopter way off in the distance, and I know that he's awake then. And that's about 6:30, so that's about 3 hours I'm in the water now, 3.5 hours, you know, by myself. And now I know he's awake. So that's like a pick me up. You know, I'm like, oh, okay, that builds me up with hope. And then, you know, I'm watching through the day, you know, in the morning, and I see him go by me looking, and they don't see me. I see another lobster boat go by me, they don't see me. So, you know, and in that point, I was like, you know, in a negative sense, like, you know, I can't believe they didn't see me. They went past me. You know, oh my God, I'm gonna die. You know, what happens when you die? How do you, you know, who gets to know the day you're gonna die? You know, all of that stuff going through your head. And then I said to myself, I'm not dying. I'm not dying. That's not the way I'm going out. I'm not having the lobsters and the crabs that I catch eat me as revenge. That's not happening. So I just put it in my head that I'm not dying, because, you know, dying is real easy. It's real seductive. It's like, it makes it okay to give up and everything. And I was like, wow, that's powerful. I don't like that. So I turned everything around into a positive. I wouldn't think about anything negative. I just thought of everything. You know, he went past me, and I didn't think, you know, oh, he went by, you know, he didn't see me. I looked at it as, all right, at least he's still looking for me. So I turned everything around that way, and it was very empowering and very uplifting.
How close were they when you saw them?
I would imagine, you know, a football field or two away. You know, I mean, on the water it seems closer, but, you know, on land it might, you know, seem real close.
Right.
But they didn't see me. You know, like I truly was a speck in the sea out there. I mean, I had, you know, brown hair, blue T-shirt. Not the best scenario to be missing in the ocean.
And the search area was tremendous. I mean, like the size of Rhode Island,
Yeah,
there,
it
right?
was
Isn't that how it started out?
Yeah, well, at first, we start off with where the last time I had seen him. So when I woke up, well, actually, our crew member, Mike, woke me up and was like, you know, who was supposed to get this next watch, and says, Johnny's not on the boat. Which immediately I'm like, you know, jump up. What do you mean he's not on the boat?
It's like
You know,
unfathomable.
that's like unheard of. And I go running up the stairs, and I look at my GPS Loran, and I'm like, holy, I'm 62 miles from land. Like, you know, I'm like far from, you know, the last time I saw him was 5 miles from land. There's 50 plus miles of ocean between Montauk Lighthouse and where I am. So I turned the boat back towards land and immediately phoned the Coast Guard, told them my coordinates and my speed, and they, you know, asked me basic questions about, you know, what does he look like, height, weight, and, you know.
Because of all the other people they might find out.
Well, yeah, he's
What did we find?
no, we're looking for someone 150, not 165. So, you know.
It's not him. Keep going.
No, you know, they even asked me what he was wearing. You know, one thing they asked me though is he a good swimmer? And I said, you know, he's a good swimmer and he's very resourceful. Well, you know, at the end of it, he used everything that he had on him to stay afloat. So the swimming was very minor. It was being resourceful, mentally, physically. You know, Johnny stayed alive in the water a lot for mental, but physically, the job that we do, most people can't do physically. You know, we do an 18-hour shift at the rail. You know, at the end of it, we could barely lift our own arms up, and it's like time to go home. So for him to
I think you should take your shirt off and show us.
Well, I didn't mean it that way. But,
Okay.
Okay.
It's in the movie.
so I was really, my goal was to try to obviously find him and shrink down the search area because the search area was so big. And as the day had gone on, there was more and more fishing boats and people that wanted to help. So I was just actually listening recently to the transcript thing, and at 36 minutes into looking for him was when I found the cooler handle, and I was able to analyze things going on our boat, and I radioed the Coast Guard and told them where approximately I thought he fell in the water. which shrunk down from 50 miles area, we had shrunk it down to a 5-mile square. And in that 5 miles is where we orchestrated our search.
But they still
And-
passed me a couple times.
Oh, sure.
And we still didn't see them. And, you know, and it's kind of this, though. Think of a shag carpet, and if you're on a wave and you're up here, you're only at the top of it for 2 or 3 seconds, and then you're back down into the trough. That's only if you know where something is that you're looking at it. So I'm facing this way now. He could be right here, and you're never going to see him. Even if you're looking in where he is, you still only have approximately 3 seconds. So when you're scanning, looking for somebody in the ocean, you don't know how fast you should go. Should I go fast? Should I go slow? Should I be looking off the port side? Should I be looking off the starboard side? And I'm communicating the entire time with trying to convince the Coast Guard that they should still be looking for him, you know? And the pressure that our local community had given to the Coast Guard
They couldn't give up.
kept them
They couldn't give up.
to look for him. So there was a lot of variables. The day was a nice day considering. The next day, they never would have found him. You know, so the water temperature is normally not that warm, which is still cold. Like no one goes swimming in their pool at 71 degrees.
Yeah.
You know, so for him to be in the water that long, his adrenaline, he saved himself. You know, we got the cavalry there, and he kept himself long enough alive to grab him out.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the waves. This is not a flat ocean that John was out in by any stretch. This is 4 or 5 foot swells the whole night and day, right? So
Yeah, I was, ingesting water, trying not to, but it was going up my nose, down my mouth, just trying to stay afloat with, your chin on the water. So I was, knowing that you're not supposed to drink the salt water, but it was, it was going up my nose and in my mouth, and I was ingesting it, and,
It moves.
constantly.
The whole ocean is moving
So-
at like a half a mile an hour with the Gulf
Right.
Stream.
So if you fall in the water here, you're going here, but it still looks like,
So hours into it, where he could have fell over, that water is somewhere else. So now, 12 hours of him being in the water, he should, in theory, be 6 miles away from where he fell in. But he wasn't, because he was holding on.
yeah, so tell about, so
So-
after you've decided, all right,
so
I'm not going to
daylight
die,
came, yeah.
I'm doing it.
So daylight comes, and I figured my salvation would be, because I knew in the ocean where I was, because that's where we live, and I knew where other lobstermen fish, and we were just north of our lobster gear. So I knew I was in the area where there was lobster buoys and stuff. So I figured, let me find a buoy. What else could I do? I mean, I'm floating in the middle of the ocean. I got to find something to hold on to. So I come up on a wave, I don't see anything, and then all of a sudden I see one way in the distance, and I said, all right, I'm going to swim in that direction. The boots under my arms. I got my arm like this, and I'm swimming with one arm, kicking, on the surface. And I finally get close enough to the first buoy, and the current, I didn't take into consideration the current, the ocean's moving, and I couldn't get to that buoy. So I had to cut my losses because I was exerting so much energy that I had to just say, all right, being that I'm a lobsterman, I knew what I was looking at. There was an east end buoy. I knew there'd be one to the west. So I focused it on going that direction. Another hour or two later, I see another buoy. I make the right choices on how
This
to
is
swim
a
to
half
it.
a mile apart. Sorry
Yeah,
to cut you
if not
off,
a little
but
more, yeah.
each buoy is approximately a half to 3/4 of a mile apart. So he's leaving one, and he's not seeing it, but he's going, all right, I know there's one a half a mile at least away, so I'm just going away from
Yeah.
the one that I can't get to.
So I get to that buoy, and once I grab it, I get pulled underwater because there's a swell, and that's connected to the bottom. So and the ocean just washes through the buoy. So I'm like sitting there for a little while, and I'm going, this isn't good. I got my boots that keep me on the surface. I'm holding on to this buoy that's pulling me under the water every time a wave goes by. I'm like, this isn't good. And I see the helicopter going back and forth, and they're going back and forth over to the west more. So I'm like, I bet you they think I'm drifting. That's why they're looking over there and not here where I am. I don't know. I'm just thinking. So I say, I got to cut that buoy. I'll cut the buoy off. I have my little knife. I pull it out. I cut the rope, about 4 feet of rope, connected to this big orange ball. and I tie it around my wrist, and I start swimming in their direction. I see the helicopter, and I'm swimming like, you're gonna see me, Couple more hours go by, I'm exhausted, and I find another buoy, and I tie two of those big orange balls together, and I sit in between them. So now I got my boots under my arm, I'm sitting between this rope with the two buoys, and I'm getting pulled on, they're getting bounced back and forth, and I'm watching the sun, and I know it's getting late in the day. So I say to myself, I don't want to go back in the open ocean and try to figure this out. I'm just going to stay on this buoy here. Whatever happens, happens. If I die, I'm going to tie myself to it. It's my friend's Pete, his buoys. He's going to come through and haul the gear eventually, find me hanging there, the worst case scenario. And at least my parents will have, some closure of sorts. But luckily that didn't happen. So I had seen the Coast Guard helicopter jet go by in the distance as I'm floating on those two buoys. And I say, man, I think that pilot might have seen me. I don't know. So I spin around to where he's going to be coming back on his pattern, and I said, I knew he was flying a pattern, and he comes by even closer, and I'm like, he had to have seen me, he had to have seen me. Well, he didn't see me. I found that out later on. And then the helicopter, about an hour or so later, I see this helicopter come flying over the top of me, and I start waving and kicking and screaming. And he turns off of me and starts hovering here. So then I'm like, oh, God, I'm going to be saved. Thank you, And I turn my back because the wash is just so violent from the helicopter. And I feel a tap on my shoulder, and it's the rescue swimmer. And he swims up to me and he says, sir, are you okay? I'm like, I got 2 more days left in me. He's like, I wasn't expecting a joke, He goes, we've been in the air 9 hours today looking for you. And I said, I've been here 12 hours looking for you. Let's get the hell out of here. And he's like, don't worry, I got everything under control. And within 3 minutes, the basket landed right next to me. I mean, it was like unbelievable how professional those guys are. And that basket laid right next to me. Yeah. So he threw me in the basket, and my boots started floating away. And I said, I need those boots. They saved my life. And unbeknownst to me, that he broke protocol because you're not allowed to have anything in the basket because it could fly out and hit the helicopter and kill everybody. But he told me, put them under your legs, hold on tight, and up I went. And that was the scariest ride I've ever been on. I was like, I had to close my eyes going up, I get into the helicopter, and they wheel me in. They're all looking at me like they can't believe they found me, kind of a thing. And the pilot puts his mask back, and he goes, "You got some will to live. We've been up here for hours looking for you." And that's when I said, I got too many people that love me to die. I wasn't going out that way, and so he said I couldn't drop you off in Montauk. He's like, but I could take you to Cape Cod. I'm like, I don't care where you take me. I'm with you guys. I don't care if we go to Hawaii right now. So, and then, in the hospital, and my core temperature was 93 degrees, and I had severe second-degree burn on my face from the sun. My tongue and mouth was swollen from being so dehydrated. And I couldn't eat for hours and hours or drink anything. It was just so on fire in my mouth from being so dehydrated. And then the next morning they kicked me out of the hospital, and this has been going on ever since.
So you're saved. You come back. Eventually, you go back on this boat.
Yeah.
How soon was that, and what was that like?
Well, Anthony had to get back the next day because we had fishing to do.
Right.
I took 2 trips off, which was about a 2-week span, just because my mother made me.
It's
You
good to listen
can't
to your
go
mother.
back. I'm like, why?
There was something the next trip that was
Weird.
pretty. You don't need to believe in God, but this is something that's like off the charts. So Johnny, the week before, had painted some buoys, and he writes on one of the buoys, "Load lives." So on my first trip back, the first buoy
Goes to grab the buoy.
I grab the buoy, and right across the top says, "Load lives." And I was like, you got to be kidding.
So now, if I would have died and he
No
would have came
way.
back and saw that, that would have been me haunting him.
But I was just like blown away by that.
Yeah.
Which I still have the high flyer. I use it in my garden. It's one of the posts.
So now, Jen, you've gone out, and now you're speaking to schools and people at the Coast Guard. I mean, inspirational speaking. Obviously, a few more inspiring stories than this. But what are some of the messages you give out there? What are some of the things you tell people?
Well, the big one for me is the positive thinking. I mean, that day, like I was always like, what if, like always not saying, oh yeah, let's do it. I was like, what if, But now, I mean, through that experience, the power of positive thinking was so overwhelmingly positive for me that it really, really, really made a difference. When your life is on the edge and you got negative and you got your positive, if you go with that negative, it's totally going to bring you down. It's totally going to eat you up and any part of your life. But that day, the positive thinking and how it made such a difference in my survival, it was just so overwhelming. So I tested all to that positive thinking and being mental in your head enough to be able to handle that. But the positive thinking end of it was really what did it.
Yeah. So you've heard this whole story now. The line in Nancy's song, the helicopter, that was its last chance. Like if it didn't find you then, it was going back.
It was so low on fuel that after I found out afterwards, that they weren't even going to stop to pick me up. They were just going to mark me and send the boat over. But the rescue swimmer, he said that sometimes people who are in a situation like that, when they see hope like that, they'll lose it and see you fly away and then die. And he didn't want to have that happen, so they made a plan that they were going to send him in the water with me to stay with me until the cutter came if they didn't have enough time, or they were going to pick me up and leave him there if they didn't have enough time. So all of these different plans had to be made before they even picked me up, and luckily everything worked out so smoothly that they picked me up and him up, and we went back and got back, and they got back just in time before they ran out of fuel enough.
So back on land, Nancy, what was it like when the word came through that he's alive?
Really, the town, it was kind of, you have to understand, it's the height of summer, and everybody is working very long weeks out there, no different than anywhere else on the East End. And it kind of like shut down. I think in the book they call it like the communal web. It really did become like that, where everybody was suddenly, this was the most important priority, and everything else stopped. It didn't matter how many hot dogs you were selling or what the show was, or if there was a line at the IGA that went out the back. It became about, there was an enormous amount of positive thinking on land. I remember asking you afterwards, when I was trying to write the song, and the one line in the song that I would change if I could is, you say, I hope you're alive. You never hoped you. You said, I know he's alive. I know he's alive. I know he's alive. And you've said you don't go looking for a dead dog, but it's like...
You don't look for a dead person. You look for a live person.
Yeah.
So that was...
Yeah.
That was it. It's like the goal right here is we need to find John. There's no... We have urgency right here, right now. Every single second that's going away is the urgency.
And every boat that went out there, what you get if you haven't read the book, I really do recommend it, because it isn't just about him surviving. It's, for me, what I took away from it was it's just about life and surviving life and how important it is to keep that. I really do think there's so many people that have gotten so much that they didn't expect. They thought there was just going to be this kind of wilderness tale, and it's not. It's about choosing how you're going to live your life on any given day with what's thrown in front of you. And I will say that one of my deepest memories was when we met him when his boat pulled in that night. It was down at the dock, and there was a big full moon, and there was a bunch of people, and there was this giant, like 6'4" guy weeping, and he said, Anthony saved his life. He saved his life because he organized everybody. And what he had done is he had really, when he said he looked and saw that snapped handle, he was able to say, well, that handle snapped because he was pulling, which meant he must have been where the fathoms were, the colder water was running, which means he must have fallen off the boat between here and here, between this time. I mean, he really was like Sherlock Holmes, putting that all together and then trying to organize everybody. So it was a group effort across the board, for sure.
It's amazing, little details like that when you hear about the buoy, about the scientific and Sherlock Holmes approach you take, the ridiculousness that you can float on these boots out there.
Yeah.
It sounds like a movie, which it's going to be. So the question I know you guys have been asked before, but I'm sure they're wondering, who do you want to play you in the movie?
I don't even know, I mean, there's so many great actors. Whoever's the most marketable, that's what I want.
Smart man.
That's the guy I want.
Anthony, who's going to play you?
I have no clue. Really.
Nancy, who should play these guys?
I don't know, but I think Helen Hunt is going to play me.
There you go.
There you go.
I think I don't know. I really. It's hard. I do think that when the combination is put together, though, it'll probably be perfect because they're so involved in it, which is great.
Absolutely.
They've been hinting to us, but nothing is set in stone.
Yeah.
So
Somebody you definitely know, though.
Great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Anthony, John, Nancy, thank you so much for being part of this. It's been great. If you haven't read, oh yeah, please, everybody's coming up now. Look at that.
Thank you.
we stand up, right?
Thank you.
Stand up, right?
Thank you. If you have not read the book, as I said, we highly recommend it. After the award ceremony for the literary prize, there will be a cocktail reception and a book signing out there where they'll be signing this book. So come by, meet them, say hi, and again, we have a lot more show coming. Thank you, guys. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, does that inspire you to find a story? We have, I guess, we have one more piece of entertainment for you, as we have had in prior years. There is, as you probably know, there is a classical music camp on Shelter Island run by Yitzhak Perlman and his wife. And we have asked them to ask one of their graduates to come down and play two short pieces for you on the piano, which you will see in a moment. Pianist Weiyin Chen, she's a graduate of the program. The first will be Brahms Intermezzo in A major, number 2. And after that, she will play Schumann's Liszt Widmung, let's give her a warm welcome, Weiyin Chen. Well, now we're going to move on to the awarding of the prizes. As I get to that, I would like to talk a little bit about how this all came about. A man named Richard Burns, who became the chairman of Dan's Papers about 8 or 9 years ago, and among the many things we discussed was the fact that where he's from, they have literary festivals where they do readings and they have competitions and I don't know what, races, who knows, swimming events, I have no idea. But somehow they have them all over England. He said, could we have something like that here? And I said, I don't think so. But then I thought about it some more and I thought, well, maybe this will work out. And so I started working on it and I got quite enthusiastic about it. And so we ran it that first year. And we had Bob Caro was our speaker for that first year as a keynote speaker. And since that time, we've had the lady El Doctorow, we had Tom Wolfe, we had Carl Bernstein, we had Jules Pfeiffer, who did that, by the way, for us. And it's just been a wonderful experience for me, and I'm glad to have it. 3 years ago, we added a second award. The main award is a $5,000 first prize. There are 2 runners-up prizes, and then there are 3 judges' favorite awards, and they'll be presented in reverse order. But before that, we'll do the literary prize for emerging writers. This is the 3rd year we've had that. We'll do the same group of prizes. And before all that, I'm going to introduce the woman who this year will be our keynote speaker. She is Gail Sheehy. She's known for having really changed the way this country views itself with a book she wrote called Passages. It came out in 1968. And it's all about how people go through different crises in their lifetimes that are in many ways very similar to what others also do. And after that, she was basically a journalist, and she's written biographies and character studies of Hillary Clinton, both Presidents Bush, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, and she's won many awards for her journalism. She also wrote a piece for New York Magazine called The Secret of Grey Gardens, and if that doesn't ring a bell, it should. This was the cover story in New York Magazine, which led to a documentary, a movie, a Broadway show, and I think another movie, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Gail Sheehy, come on out.
Thank you, Dan. Boy, it is such a pleasure to be here welcoming and honoring emerging writers. And I'd like to thank Dan again for his really generous personal support for struggling writers, because you know what? That includes all of us, all of our writing lives. So let's hear it for Dan again. So I know that some of you are starstruck writers out there, and that's a good thing, because that's the way we get up every morning and try to do this hard thing. And I'd like to mention that I think there's still hope for a restoration of the English language. And secretly, I've heard that Melania is working with Donald on simple sight word bingo. Let me start with one practical tip. Don't give up your day job, because that way you can spend, or should, at least a couple of hours every day writing your own stuff. And you know, singers vocalize every day, sports stars work out every day, serious writers know what they need to do to work that tender muscle of the imagination on a regular basis. Otherwise, you may have to make a buck by writing sponsored content for a soap company, or ghostwriting a memoir for somebody whose peak experience was taking a selfie with the Pope. So you have to ask yourselves, why do you write? Or what is the reason you just have to write? My earliest reason for writing, I was about 7 years old, was my grandmother gave me my first typewriter, and I wanted to understand what I was living. I was living in a suburb, boring suburb. We didn't have CNN back then to bring wars and violence and excitement into our living rooms. We didn't have Game of Thrones to teach us 50 ways to fornicate without ever resorting to the missionary position. And my way of exploring the whys began when I took my first secret train ride from my suburb to Grand Central Station on the commuter train, 45 minutes, 10 years old. I just had to see, there was a radio show called Grand Central Station, Crossroads of a Million Private Lives. Bum, 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 bum. And I had to see these private lives. I wanted to see what other people lived like. So I get there, I run up the steps to around the big rotunda. I look up at the sky where there was this whole constellation. It looked like animals were just going to drop in. And then I watched these people, and I would see some man in a slouch hat walk across, and then he'd run into a woman who would have on dark glasses, and they'd kind of communicate for a little bit and then split apart, and I'd say, they must be communists. Right in my little notebook, something I knew nothing about, but sounded so exciting. And then I would see a man on a little roller, one-legged man, and he's very, very sweet-looking, and people are really dropping a lot of money into his tin can. And then later, I noticed him off on the side, pull his pant leg down and his good leg down, and pick up his little roller and walk off, look very happy. And I said, wow, that taught me that, people aren't always exactly what they seem. That was a valuable lesson. So those sneak visits to Grand Central, taught me a few useful truths. And it actually, that method of learning about stories that I could write about, I came to think of much later as saturation reporting, where you literally saturate yourself in a milieu and learn everything about it until you begin to think like the people who are in it. And so sometimes you can translate their inner thoughts. And I studied with a famous anthropologist, Margaret Mead, at Columbia University, who became my mentor. And she gave me this manifesto that totally sunk in my approach to writing and reporting. She said, whenever you hear about a great cultural phenomenon, a revolution, an assassination, a notorious trial, an attack on the country or the city, just drop everything, get on a bus or a train or a plane, and get there and stand on the edge of the abyss. Look down into the abyss, and you will see your culture turned inside out in a raw state, the way you otherwise never would. That was a terrific piece of advice, and I've been acting on it ever since. As a matter of fact, I acted on it a couple of weeks ago at the height of the Charlottesville crisis and notorious tragedy. There was, eruption of white supremacists and neo-Nazis in this peaceful college town, quite a progressive town, by the way, that voted for Bernie Sanders. So this was a major rupture in our culture, and definitely I had to get to it. And a young woman had been crushed to death. You probably saw news about it, by a weaponized car. And it was during a peaceful march of counter-demonstrators on the day after the march through the campus with the torches. So I started looking on Heather Heyer, that was her name, Heather Heyer's Facebook page, looking at her friends lists. You can't you try to go through a PR person or you try to go through people who are just immediately traumatized, you're really not going to get anywhere. So fortunately, as writers today, we have this other means where we can go out and try to search somebody down through social media. So I was looking at her friends list, her tagged photos, friends who commented on her photos, and then I messaged them, as many as I could, and asked if they would help me get in touch with her, because I'd like to write a story about who Heather Heyer was and how she came to be such a brave social activist. Well, only a few of them responded, but they wound up being the key people who did guide me to her closest friends and family. So it took a day before I got a call back from Heather's boss at the family law firm where she worked as a paralegal, and he was very protective of Heather and her coworkers, and especially her mother. I had to win his trust, and you always do when it's any kind of a traumatic situation or one in which there are many different people converging and trying to get a story. So I had to give him a comfort level with him by letting him know that I would do a different kind of story than somebody would stick a camera in your face. And I also wanted to get as much information as I could about Heather, and it was fascinating. So we bonded, and he gave me an all clear to come to the office on a Monday and meet with her coworkers and friends and maybe with her mother. Well, turned out 2 of her girlfriends had been with her on that day and walked right up to the point where the car smashed into all 3 of them, grazing 2 of them and running over Heather. So we walked every step of that violent walk and what the neo-Nazis and white supremacists were doing to provoke it. I had 2 interviews with her mother and learned about very fascinating background of this young woman, not the usual kind of heroine. She grew up in a trailer park outside of Charlottesville with a single mom, and the winds would come very often and rip the skirt off the bottom of the trailer, and wild animals would get in, heat would go out, pipes would freeze. It was a really rugged upbringing. Even so, her mother was one of the first in her family to go to college. Not only to college, but she was, at the time that Heather was 2 years old, going to the University of Virginia to study social work and teaching, education. But she had to leave before she was able to get her degree because she had 2 young children trying to keep them in this trailer. And Heather was such a good-hearted person. She kept bringing home cast-offs, kids from families where there was real neglect or violence, and asking mom if she would take them in. And first mom would have to find out if they were runaways, because then it's illegal, but if they were just facing a difficult family situation, she would take them in to this single wide trailer. I mean, they were really, as her mother said, that's family values where I come from. So that's what she imbued her daughter with. And her daughter kind of bounced around, having no self-esteem as she grew up. Finally went to work for this family law firm that practiced poverty law, taking care of people who were facing bankruptcy or losing their homes or facing catastrophic illness, and they were indebted and needed help. So she worked there, and then she began one by one bringing in friends of hers who were in dead-end jobs, but they had some special skill, and she would talk her boss into giving them a tryout, and they all worked out. So there was a very close family. In fact, the boss even put in a little mini bar, so at the end of a really tough day, they could sit around with their friends and relax. So, I found this unique story, wrote it. It just went up today, a New York magazine, on the digital version. It's called What Heather Knew. And I think it's an inspiring story because this young woman who grew up with almost nothing became such a believer in social justice that she was willing to go out and knew that she was risking very great danger that day, as did her friends, because of what the white supremacists had done the night before and that morning. And she gave her life. And as her mother said to me very plainly, she said, Heather wasn't a saint. It really bothers me when people try to cast her as a saint. She was a normal 32-year-old young woman who did the right thing. So I hope you'll read the story and feel inspired by it. But how do you find a story that's, right under your nose, which is what your assignment was in this contest? Well, I found a unique story in this town when I was just renting here. This was back in 1971. I really can't take full credit because it was my 7-year-old daughter who found it, and it became known as the Secret of Grey Gardens. So here's what happened. A bunch of little baby kittens were left in a box in the driveway of the rented house we had. And my daughter wanted me to take them home. And I said, well, they really wouldn't survive the train ride. And she said, well, let's take them to the witch house. And the witch house was across the street. And so we ducked under ropes of bittersweet and hanging from a pair of twisted catalpa trees. It was all really looked like deep southern plantation. And then there were wild cats, really wild cats, making terrible noises. And there were like dozens of them, very angry. We got through them, we got up onto the porch, and it was, sagging, and there were poop all over the place, and there was a sign saying, police inside, So we were about to turn around, and suddenly we heard this voice saying, Mother? And we turned around, and there was a woman with her head wrapped in a jacket and her skirt on upside down, but she looked very glamorous face, and she looked very familiar. Couldn't place her. And she said, do you think we care for animals here? And my daughter said, yes, would you take our cats? And she said, you see, the children see it. The children sense it. The old people don't like us. They think I'm crazy. The Bouviers don't like me at all. Mother says that, but the children, they understand. This is a very different kind of a person. And so my daughter then said the thing that really clinched the interview. She said, it must be really fun to live in a house where you don't have to clean up. Again, little Edie said, you see, the children understand. And so, shortly thereafter, we hear this noise upstairs saying, Edie, I want my canapé. So little Edie, who is the niece of the Bouviers, cousin of Jacqueline Kennedy, her mother, who is the aunt of Jacqueline Kennedy, they are the outcasts of the family. They have moved into this house years and years before when the senior Bouvier divorced her. And the young Bouvier, little Edie, was really glamorous. She was prettier than Jackie, really, and she wanted to be a model. So she went off to New York and had lived in the Barbizon and was trying to put together a model or acting career. But Mother found a way to pull her back in this really gothic way and had kind of kept her prisoner there for most of her life. She's now 45. So when she takes us into the kitchen and she says, winks at us to show us this really secret act of subversion. She takes a can of cat food and she molds it nicely on a bed of lettuce. And then she puts a nice twist of lemon on the top. And that's Mama's canapé. So this made a fabulous story. It took me all summer to do it by going to meet with little Edie every week at the beach and hearing stories of her life and her misfortunes and her fortunes. It was published in New York Magazine as a cover story with little Edie on the front with her skirt on backwards. And the Maisels brothers subsequently made a film of it called Grey Gardens, an underground film that became very popular. It then became a movie, which you may have seen with Drew Barrymore, and it then became a Broadway show. So you never know when you start out with a really small idea. But the point is it's something that is so compelling to you, so enticing, so exciting, so necessary to put out there that you can't stop yourself from following it. So I just want to say that when I sit down to write either a magazine article or the first chapter of a book, I don't tell myself, now Gail, produce a hit here, or write a work of art. That would freak me out. I write because there is some idea I want to propose that may be out there, but nobody has really articulated it, or there's some lie I want to expose. And I write that core idea on a Post-it, and I stick it on the bottom of my computer monitor to remind me, to scold me, when I wander too far off the track. That is a really helpful hint I pass on. And I have to say that warning about lies is urgently necessary today, especially when it comes to political language. No one said it better than George Orwell. He wrote a famous essay on politics and the English language 100 years ago. And he wrote, "The obvious opposition between lies and truthful leads into the shockingly abrupt coupling of murder and respectable." Think about that. Think about the example when our president coupled violent white supremacists and Ku Klux Klan members and neo-Nazis with peaceful, unarmed counter-protesters during the horror of their own, when they were, these people wanted to honor their own racially integrated southern city. So think about that. Think about, exposing lies or proposing new ideas, and you will have a hit without even trying. Thank you.
We will now come to the awards themselves. We are going to begin with the competition for the emerging young writers. These were entries for people under 25. Oh, they're children. And the essays were the same length as they were for the full-grown adults, which was 600 to 1,500 words. And the first thing we're going to award are the 3 Judges' Choice Awards. And for that, I'm going to ask to come out a man you're quite familiar with, and you have seen him often before at this program, Eric Feil, who will make these awards. Come on out.
So Anthony and I went back there, we took off the shirts, and it's been decided that Brad Pitt and George Clooney are playing me in the movie, but together. So again, welcome, emerging young writers, welcome. Thank you all so much for entering, for coming here today. When I was driving here today, I was speaking to one of my college roommates who reminded me that 30 years ago, I first got published as a writer. I was a freshman, and it was a very heady sort of moment. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have been published online. You see your words either in line or in print, wherever you send them out, more than 140 characters, I'm hoping, all the time. And it's something that you will continue, no matter what you do in life, to be thrilled by. I don't get to write as much as I like to, but every now and then, I'll get to put a story together. It could be a restaurant review. It could be an interview with guys like John and Anthony, a piece about going to a Nancy show. Keep the writing alive. No matter what you're doing in life, you might go and become a doctor. Well, you know what? Doctors write. Doctors have entered this contest. Lawyers have. No matter where you go, keep that passion alive for writing, because it's a very, very important thing to do and important to share with the world. So, speaking of sharing, I have the envelope of the emerging Judges' Choice winners. Each of you, I'm going to call you all up. I'll each name each winning essay. Come up as a group. Barbara's down there somewhere. I think she'll get a photo maybe. If not, we'll go backstage and do one. We have some lovely prizes for you. Nooks from Barnes & Noble. Gift cards from Barnes & Noble. Thank you, Barnes & Noble. We love you. And a suitable for framing, as I say each year. What else would it be suitable for? Certificate of your success here. The moment some of you have been waiting for. The 2017 Emerging Writers Judges' Choice winners are Skipping Rocks by James Michelson. It's nice that you held your applause. I didn't even say it. Two Worlds by Rebecca Putas. And Gray Butterfly Gardens by Alexander Motz. So I don't know if any of the people here... Oh, there we go. Yep, the emerging writers, a lot of them are in college. So good for them. They're out there, they're working hard, they're studying. As I told my nieces and nephews who went to college this year, that's all you're gonna do is work hard and study. The whole party, fun stuff, it's a myth. It doesn't happen. Congratulations, good stuff. Well, and you've emerged here on the stage to collect. Who are you collecting for? Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
You know what? I'm going to invite you to come this way, backstage. Photo opportunity. Then you get to be in dance papers, even as a photo. Then you're famous. Everyone wants pictures. Words, nah, not so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much. There's more coming for the show, and I will be back later on.
Now we come to the runners-up awards for the emerging young writers. And to hand out those awards, I'd like you to meet Daniel Simone, who is a local author who's had two recent and very successful nonfiction books. One, The Lufthansa Heist, about a gangster's robbery at Kennedy Airport, and the other, Pierre Hotel Affair, about another heist at that famous landmark hotel on Fifth Avenue. Daniel, come on out.
Good evening. This is the first of our two 500 second place awards. Who can it be? Well, and the winner for the first runner-up award is the title, If I Could Tell Him, by Amanda Barbara. Amanda, please come up. Would you like to say something about yourself, or perhaps something about your entry?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Amanda Barbara. This piece is about my grandfather and about things I wish I could have told him before he died. And I remember my family sharing memories and stories with him, and I remember myself being in shock and being scared to say something. And then when he died, I regretted not saying anything, and I kept on thinking, I should have told him this. I wish I said this. And this piece was closure for me and a big moment for me when I just felt that I can move on and feel happier again. So thank you to the judges.
We have another. Okay. This is the second of our two $500 second place awards. Maybe I should have entered this one. Let's see. And the winner is the title, Pink Sweater, by Jordan Ferdman. Come on. Like to say something and tell us perhaps a bit about your entry?
Yeah, sure. So my entry was about my relationship with one of my teachers, who I'm really close with and I'm really grateful is in my life. And though it wasn't really about them, I'd like to thank my parents for driving me here in the traffic. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And now we come to a big moment, and the winner of the $3,000 first prize award. And guess what? I have it right here. So the winner for first place for Emerging Writers Prize is The Last Landscape by Anthony DeFeo. Anthony, come on up.
He's at the University of Buffalo studying film.
Okay,
And-
tell them that too.
Yeah, our son Anthony is a junior at the University of Buffalo studying film studies, and his passion is going to be making films about life here on the East End. He absolutely loves the people and the places out here, and he actually gave me a little acceptance.
All right, take
He
it.
didn't know, but he actually come prepared.
I'm sure he's a writer, he can do that.
He loves to write.
Yes.
He says, many thanks to the Dan's Papers for hosting this enlightening literary festival and prize. It is a great honor to be able to share the story of William Langston Lathrop. He recognized the subtle and often humbling beauty of this island, maintaining a reverence and respect for it even in death. I'd like to thank him, amongst all artists and writers who are enchanted by this land of ours, for inspiring me to share it as well.
And now we're going to have a reading of this first prize winner. The winning entry is going to be read by Melissa Leo. She's appeared in over 40 films. She started in daytime television, where she won an Emmy for All My Children. She starred in the movie Streetwalkin' and had roles in American Gun, Hide and Seek, Mr. Woodcock, Frozen River, and many others. And she won an Academy Award for supporting actress for her role in the film The Fighter. Melissa Leo will now read Anthony's winning entry, The Last Landscape.
The deck of the Widge rocked gently in the September swells, sending tubes of paint rolling in their box. A worn yet steady hand reached down and grabbed the green, squeezing it into a blob of white to produce a pale sage color. On a rolling landscape of dune and scrub, a ripple of beach grass appeared, streaming across the foreground in the rising wind. William Langston Lathrop sat back on his stool and pursed his lips. Gazing over the canvas at the coast of Montauk not far off the prow, it lacked the fur and farmhouses of his home in New Hope, Pennsylvania, precisely why he had come so far. At 79, and with an illustrious career behind him, it was time for a change of scene. For 7 summers prior, he had taken the boat, built by his own 2 hands, out into the open water as his floating painting studio. He captured the moods of the shores he passed, each trapped in time by a veil of fog and obscured on the horizon by a smear of an index finger. Most painters in his day were intrigued primarily by the light of the sun, how it fell on cobblestones and wide-brimmed hats, the way it filtered through glasses of sherry and storefront windows. They stippled and speckled in bright colors across their canvases, calling themselves Impressionists. William erased the pencil outline of a cloud on a blank spot of canvas and removed an unmarred patch from the blob of white with the tip of his brush. Right before it touched the fabric, he pulled his hand back and stuck the end in his mouth, pensive. For him, the atmosphere, the elements that hung in the air between the light and the surfaces it touched, was a far worthier subject than the light itself. There was a mysticism in the forces of nature that created such looming, ominous forms as clouds, and he intended to illuminate that. Painting on plein air never left enough time to do it justice. The atmosphere is a fickle thing, as unpredictable as a dog in front of a camera. If you don't move quick enough, it'll get bored and go on its way. Gazing directly up, a swatch of blue sky disappeared behind a blanket of gray. The air, already damp with days of spotty rain, felt cold against his face. If he were to finish the painting in the studio later, it would need a proper start on the deck of the Widge. Working at a faster pace than usual, William swathed tan and gray over a field of light blue, leaving hints of the sky above the beach below. Pink and ruddy burgundy cut faintly across the sand as he neared the horizon. Peering around the canvas, he saw that the space where the sky met the land had grown considerably darker than he had painted it. No matter. Such changes occur quickly in nature, and he was no stranger to the whims of the wind. It was his pleasure to witness the faculties of nature firsthand. But there was little time to make the adjustment. The first drop of rain clunked onto the palette, blending the blue and green together in a swampy sort of yellow. William took the canvas and it became a blur of hues and shades showered in soft, muted color until the coastline appeared. Above the dunes rose a plume of gray vapor like that of a steam engine, or perhaps a whole herd of them approaching from the distance. A raindrop landed right on the canvas. It was time to turn in. Shuffling his paints and brushes into the box, William hurried the canvas and easel into the ship's cabin. He placed the painting down on a beach and noticed the bottom left corner was empty. He almost laughed, grabbing a brush and dipping it into a puddle of black on his drying palette. In a hurried scrawl, he signed and dated the bottom, September 21st, 1938. Topside again, William took hold of the jib line and brought it in, the wind strong enough that it fought him till it folded. Though he was an older man than the one who had braved the Naval Academy in youth, he took the rigging like any able seaman. Salt spray over the starboard side landed on his back, sending a chill up his spine. The cabin radio chimed. William descended and grabbed the receiver, listening closely to the ticking message. It was a small craft advisory. A gale was arriving from the south. This excited the painter. The opportunity to ride out a storm was a rare one. Unfortunately, Atlantic coastal waters were no place to do it, so he made for the shelter of Fort Pond Bay. Coming about, he listened to the wind howling in the spar. It was hollow and empty, bringing with it a pang of loneliness. He missed his wife, Annie, and the warmth of their house when they held tea for family and friends. As much as he valued his solitude on the sea, William longed for his companions. Engaging in truly good conversation was a dying art. The rain fell heavier against the deck. Annie would have scolded him for being out in foul weather. He chuckled at the thought, pulling the tiller toward him to angle into Fort Pond Bay. Over the dunes, he could see a mast or two, other travelers in the storm seeking refuge. As he rounded the spit of sand, 2 fishing boats came into full view. William tried to wave, but the wind gusted, sending the boom flying towards him. Nimble yet, he ducked underneath, pushing against the tiller. The Widge glided along the shore of the bay, rocking as whitecaps slapped her hull, the storm kicking up fast. Unsure of how much water there was left to draw, he brought in the mainsail and dropped anchor, mooring within sight of the 2 fishing boats. They rocked in the gale as well, weathering the beating as best they could. Seeking some relief from the rain, the painter ducked into the cabin. The radio continued to beep, but it brought the same warning. He struck a match, leaving a wisp of smoke as he lit a lantern hanging above the folding table. Through the portals, he watched the bay rise and fall, framed whimsically in the brass circles. Outside, lightning snapped to the southwest by the lighthouse. The great tower's beams swung around, blurred in the rain that pounded the glass. Thunder overhead shook the Widge. A swell jolted the cabin, sending a nautical chart rolling on top of the painting of the shoreline. William snatched it up, relieved to find the painting hadn't smeared. As he gazed at his work, the sounds of the storm writhing outside, something in the threatening clouds spoke to him. He saw the very winds that whipped around the Widge, barreling down on the viewer, climbing over the horizon with an unstoppable ferocity. He could hear it throbbing in his ears, rumbling against the hull to the point where it shivered as if alive. It was magnificent. The cabin still open to the elements. William walked to the steps and rose, coming halfway out and resting his arms on the top deck. His wisps of hair whirled round his head, spectacles beaded with rainwater and salt. He was awash in the glory of the storm, invited to cross the bridge between man and nature that fascinated him so deeply. A low roar, barely heard above the din, rose from the north side of the bay. The beam from the lighthouse cut over the water, trailing across a great gray wall that surged towards the Widge. It was the biggest wave the artist had ever seen, roiling with the sheer force of the hurricane. A faint smile flickered across William's face. He had spent a life dedicated to the earth, its colors, tones, and temperaments, and the hard-working people who tend and keep it. He counted himself among them, a farmer in his youth, a sailor at hand, and a poet at heart. The wave rising, moving ever closer. He took a final breath of damp, salt air. When the Widge washed ashore several days later, William Langson Lathrop was not on board. Instead, they found his final work, a landscape of Montauk, dated September 21st, 1938. Forever captivated by nature's power and spirit, the artist's last painting was of the very storm that took his life. Thank you, Anthony DeFeo.
Now we'll move on to our main contest award. The first prize is $5,000. The 2 runners-up each get $500. And before we do that, I'm going to invite Dava Sobel. I don't know if any of you know her. She lives in East Hampton, to give a keynote speech for the main award. Dava writes about science. Her most famous book, Longitude, is about an English clockmaker named John Harrison, who attempted to convince the world that he had discovered a scientific way for ships at sea to determine their longitude. that had never been done before. Her next book, Galileo's Daughter, won a Pulitzer Prize nomination. 3 more books followed. Her most recent book is The Glass Universe, How the Ladies of the Harvard Observatory Took the Measure of the Stars. Dava, come out and deliver your address.
Thank you. Congratulations, everyone. All the entrants to the nonfiction essay contest. As a nonfiction writer myself, I've always wondered about that term. The whole genre defined by what it is not. But in this age of alternate facts and fake news, nonfiction takes on grave new importance. And it falls to all of us to tell true stories whenever and wherever we can. So on that note, I would just like to say climate change is real. And if elected officials at the highest levels of the national government insist on ignoring 100 years of scientific evidence that global temperatures are rising because of the burning of fossil fuels, well, then the states and the citizenry will just have to take the initiative to save humanity from this catastrophe. But I digress. I was asked to come here today to encourage, especially the young writers, and I heartily encourage you. Some of you probably want to become writers to earn your living that way, but even for those of you who don't have those plans, being a good writer is fundamental to any number of professions. One of you might be elected president someday, and would be a wonderful light for the nation if you could express yourself in complete sentences. So all of these essays all somehow touch on life on the East End. But more and more, the lines between local and global blur. And I could not read about Hurricane Harvey this week without thinking of Bob and Gloria and Sandy and the Long Island Express hurricane of 1938. When I was a child and all hurricanes were considered female, I offered my name to the Weather Service, but they didn't take it. It's often said about writers that they don't really enjoy writing so much as they enjoy having written. And I'm sure most of you have already discovered the flaw in that quip, because personally, given the choice between writing and having written, I would much prefer sitting in my room alone when the work is going well to any sort of public appearance like this one. Forgive me, Dan. I really am happy to be here. But since you're a writer yourself, I think you know what I mean. Writing is hard work. If it were easy, everybody would do it. But it also gives the writer a tremendous personal reward. Those moments when you find exactly the right phrase to convey your idea, those are pure intoxication. They don't come often. no matter how experienced you are. And it's that fact, that intermittent nature of those moments that is as addictive as gambling, and for the same reason. When I was a science reporter for the New York Times, I got to interview the behaviorist B.F. Skinner about his experiments with rats and pigeons. And Skinner was always interested in the effect of reinforcement on behavior. And for example, if you reward a rat for pressing a lever by giving him a food pellet, he's a lot more likely to press that lever again. And you would think that always rewarding the behavior would lock it in place. But it turns out that the surest way of training is to give the reward only some of the time. And that makes the rat hit the lever like a maniac. And Skinner called that pattern, that reward pattern, an intermittent schedule of reinforcement. And that's what those moments in writing are like. They come intermittently. If you show up at your desk, you just might hit it today. But if not, you keep hitting those keys. As a science writer, I am rigorous about fact-checking. This goes back to my early experience as a science writer in the Cornell University News Bureau, where I was expected to clear everything with the source, either by sending a draft through the campus mail or calling the person on the phone to read the article. And I kept that up when I got to the New York Times, until one day an editor caught me on the phone and told me I had a heightened respect for scientists. And after that, I kept checking the science with the scientists, but I was more quiet about it. Writing is a surefire way to learn new things, even about yourself. This may sound like a non sequitur, but I believe that this year is the first time that the encouraging words have been delivered by a woman. I hope some of you... I hope some of you find that encouraging, maybe all of you. But I mention it because my new book is about a group of women women astronomers who worked at the Harvard College Observatory from the late 1800s through the mid-20th century. And it's the first time I've written a book about women scientists. Now, I would have considered myself a mild-mannered feminist, but this book, this experience really put me in touch with my own misogyny. And that is a harsh word to use about my own feelings. And I am the mother of a daughter and have written this book about women doing important research. But I kept finding myself surprised over and over again by the scope of the understanding of these women and the magnitude of the contributions they made. And I finally had to admit that I was guilty of the widespread belief that, of having that, sharing that widespread belief that if a woman accomplishes something, then it couldn't have been very difficult in the first place. Dan asked me to talk about writing process, and the one thing, most valuable thing I think I can share with you from my own experience is that I always try to write for just one person. have a particular individual in mind, which is a lot easier than thinking of writing for the general public, a vague and terrifying prospect. But if I think of one person as the recipient of the story, that's really helpful. So with Longitude, the person was my mother. And she had been a real navigator, had her own sextant, but she didn't know the history of the longitude problem, and she found all of that fascinating. And speaking only to my mother in the writing of that book allowed me to connect with more people than I had ever reached before with anything else I'd written. In other words, writing to just one person does not necessarily preclude any of you from reaching millions with your words. So you may become a very popular writer someday, and if you do, someone will hand you a microphone. And suddenly you'll realize you have a platform where you could say anything. So in conclusion, I would just like to remember aloud, this week is the 54th anniversary of the March on Washington. 200,000 marchers for jobs and freedom. No violence, no arrests. And because I was there, I can't believe where we are now, where our country has come. And I realize what a mistake it is to think that freedom gained is a secure thing. I mean, it's no wonder that 1984 and The Handmaid's Tale are back on bestseller lists, also on Broadway and streaming on Hulu. So freedom, including freedom of the press, is a rare and precious commodity. It requires constant nurturing, vigilant defending, and you do it every day with your nonfiction writing. So keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dava. I wanted to talk for a moment about after this event, we're having a wine and cheese thing out in the garden, and you'll be able to buy books if you want from any of the authors here, including Dava and Dan Simone, Gail Sheehy, Anthony Sosinski, John Aldridge. They'll sign them for you. I'll give you a fish, and myself. And there'll be, you'll get a ticket in the garden to get a book, and then you go to pass the food and the drinks and have a good time. So the next thing we have to do is to award the Judge's Choice Awards for the main Dan's Papers $5,000 nonfiction awards. And for that, I again ask Eric File to please come on out. He'll do the awards.
My friend Dan's funny. He writes about lions being released out here, right, and Ecuadorian eels. but he undersells the wine and cheese thing. It is no wine and cheese thing. I don't even know if there's cheese. I don't want to promise things. I mean, Dan, I have to fact check him. There may be no cheese. But Union Cantina and Southampton Social Club are here catering this fine soiree that will have rosés and reds and whites and Saranac beer. See, isn't that much more appealing? That's what I'm talking about. So yes, please, come out and join us there in the garden for that. In addition to the book signing, there is also a silent auction that also supports the literary prize. We have Dan's papers, canvas covers. We have some signed books. It's funny, I was telling David backstage that I have a copy of Longitude that I've had forever in the nightstand next to my bed, which I've loved. There are copies of that that are not mine because I'm not giving it away, but other ones out there. Galileo's Daughter, a signed copy of The Fighter that Melissa Leo has signed. There are experiences out here. One of them, I was very tempted to do a little live auction thing here, but I won't, is a literary tour of the Hamptons directed by Mr. Dan Ratiner himself. So out here, John Steinbeck's written out here. Gin Lane has been a book by James Brady, Vonnegut, Plimpton, Dan Ratiner himself, many places out here he's written about. So this will be a tour that Dan, limo-driven, Dan won't be driving, don't worry, around the Hamptons. He'll tell you the stories, point out the sites, and then it finishes up with dinner with Dan at Pierre. So that's just one of the experiences out there. Look at it, bid, they're fun. I may bid on that one myself, so if you see me and I'm writing a number down, just kind of shove me inside and cross it, and that'll be a great time. Again, please, everybody stays around. For the winners, we'll also do another group photo out there with Dan, without Dan. You can steal his hat, put it on, so it's a good time coming. Now, I was one of the judges in the contest this year. Incredible, incredible stories. So the next 6 names we read out between these 3 and the 3 back there waiting all really, truly deserve the awards they've gotten tonight. The judge's choice for the 2017 Literary Prize for Nonfiction go to She Was Dancing on the Edge, My Last Memory of Marilyn by Joel Vig. A Letter to My Daughter by John Zaremba. And Mama Lee and Rose by Jaylene Lawler. Up next are the runners-up and then the grand big prize. So stay around and we'll see you out in the garden.
Okay, without further ado, I'd like to bring out again Daniel Simone, who will make the 2 awards for the runners-up in the main literary prize competition. These come with a $500 award. Dan?
It's me again. This is the first of our 2 $500 second place awards. The envelope, please. And the name of this entry is A Little Wild by Heather Tomick. Are you here? Come on up. Is she here?
She's coming.
And here is your award.
Congratulations.
You are the runner-up in Dan's papers, second prize, literary prize for nonfiction. Say something about your entry.
Thank you. So this piece really started off just about my children who are growing up as East Enders. I did not grow up as an East Ender, so just really looking at all the kind of weird and strange and kind of sometimes sad experiences with nature that they've had as a result of growing up here. So thank you so much.
Yes. They got me working overtime here. We'll have to address this with my union delegates. This is the second of our 2 500 second place awards. see, here's the envelope, which I already have. And the winner is, I can't seem to read the name. Oh, here we go. The winner is Eve Elliott. And the piece is Seeking Hampton's Based Organically Grown Lover. Please come up.
Congratulations, thank you so much.
Congratulations.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Let's hear about your entry.
So what prompted this piece, which is a kind of parody of an online dating profile, is that my friend who I brought with me this evening, and you can meet her in the garden if you'd like, asked me to help her write her online dating profile. And when I finished, I said to myself, if I was going to write an online dating profile, what would I say? And I immediately burst out laughing and wrote this piece. So maybe I'll post it someday, but it basically says, I really don't want to date. So, at all. Come out to the garden and meet my friend later. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dan, for your amazing community building and appreciation of writers. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Quickly. Thank you.
Well, we've come to the last award, and guess what? It's right here. This is a $5,000 award for first prize in the Dan's Papers $5,000 essay for nonfiction competition. And the winner is Thomas Fox for the East End Rocks. Hi. Congratulations. Great story. Books from Barnes & Noble. Let's say a few words, if you would.
I'm sure. I was pretty excited to be given a nudge that I might want to be here today. But I'm just flabbergasted after all the talented people and the courageous people who were here before me. I'm just so honored. Thank you to Dan and Dan's Papers and all the sponsors. This is fantastic. Thank you.
And now Melissa Leo will read the winning entry. Here she comes.
The East End Rocks by Thomas Fox. After nearly 40 summers in Mattituck, my parents have finally paved the driveway. Until now, we'd always parked on nothing more than spare pavers surrounded by pebbles. Thousands of pounds of pebbles, as I know, deep in my bones. Despite living within walking distance of Peconic Bay, my dad would often schlep me, my sister, and our visiting friends to the Sound, where he would take advantage of the abundant free stones and child labor. We would go with empty buckets and enjoy a day at the beach and return with our heavy laden car hunkering low like a guilty puppy. Growing year by year, layer by layer, the driveway was solid and unassuming, just like the North Fork itself. 4 decades ago, it felt like an unbounded place, We would turn off Route 105 onto the main road, passing through a succession of towns, blurring into each other alongside a seemingly endless string of trees, roughly pruned into donuts to accommodate wires, like a parade of arboreal okay gestures. I'd measured the distance to our house through landmarks, the snack bar with its retro neon sign, and then the cider mill, Cliff's Elbow Room in Jamesport, followed 3 minutes later by Cliff's Elbow 2, just off stage left in the hamlet of Laurel, the railroad overpass spray-painted to announce Hooterville, and of course, Magic Fountain. On our block, scrub trees suggested the borders of properties that otherwise spilled into each other, and the verge crept into the curbless street. Sand dusted every crack and crevice, inside and out, like granular spackle. Our permanent address may have been Central Nassau, but the East End was home. The North Fork my sons have enjoyed over the past decade reminds me of how I saw the South Fork at their ages. Irrigated, manicured, neatly parceled into farmland and lively downtowns, old bungalows and Tony cul-de-sacs, paddocks and chiropractors' offices. It almost feels like I've witnessed evolution. Indeed, a large sign now stands where we used to turn onto the main road, "Welcome to Long Island Wine Country." The beverage of note in my first summers in Mattituck was milk. My sister and I used to buy it at a refrigerated vending machine near the corner. It was the height of convenience, a brave new world. Now my sons could buy half-soy lattes with as little effort if I let them, which, of course, I don't, any more than my parents would have let a preteen me order a coffee. Some things don't change. On the North Fork, such things include daylilies' deep orange bursts and roadside chicory's electric blue, both burning like fireworks all summer long, and the elusive glow of comb jellies in the bay at night. And things that do change out here remain linked to the past. You can hardly drive from one place to another without driving roads once marking the borders of colonial homesteads, or the even older Indian trails over which they were laid. My parents remember the changing ownership of restaurants like biblical genealogies. O'Malley's, heir to the Ross's North Fork, which had the most delicious oysters and garlic and Pernod, begat by Raymond's restaurant. Mom and Dad remember Sandy, Floyd, and Gloria, less as hurricanes than as unruly guests who consumed all of our refrigerated goods and made shambles of the outdoor furniture. Not that my parents are backward looking. After all, they just paved the driveway. However strong my family's love of the North Fork, our connection to the East End began 2 generations earlier on the South Fork. A few years ago, I confirmed the family lore about my great-grandmother by scouring the internet with a few details passed down to me. Anna O'Grady and Southampton and 1930 and fire. The magic of the Boolean search found me a New York Times headline, stacked like a Napoleon. L.H. Ting, home burns, maid dies in flames. Financier, wife, and 3 of 6 Southampton guests hurt in early morning fire. Hosts leap from a roof. Mr. and Mrs. Casey Green, felled by smoke, saved. Mrs. W.A. Bartlett, also in hospital. My great-grandmother had appeared in the Times. Unfortunately, she was the maid. Another contemporary articles confirmed the basic details. I tried to summon some righteous, almost Marxist indignation of the Tings and their cronies, about whom the Times account provides almost a cartoonish level of ammunition. For example, Mr. and Mrs. Tying, they of the roof leaping, were shaken and bruised in landing. Mr. Ting also wrenched his leg. Not a wrenched leg. And poor Dr. Van Wagen was not just shaken, but badly shaken. Oh, and a maid dies in the flames. Meanwhile, state police were detailed to guard the smoldering ruins pending the possible salvaging of jewelry and silverware amid, as it were, my great-grandmother's ashes. Nice. But the fact is, I never knew my great-grandmother, nor did my mother. My grandmother barely did. She had been squirreled away at a convent school when her mother died. My sympathy for Anna is not very much greater than that for the poor, really quite rich Tings. Their house burned to the ground, killing their maid, injuring their friends, and forcing them to literally jump for their lives to escape the flames. That night must have haunted them for the rest of their lives, which wouldn't be long for Mrs. Ting. She died less than 3 years later. I don't begrudge them the silverware. Plus, if I'm honest, the combination of a financier and the Gilded Age setting makes me imagine Mr. Ting in a top hat and spats recounting the fire to Andrew Mellon over a snifter of brandy. Let's just say it put the hot in my toddy, old chap, and the wrenched leg has made a dickens of my short game. The Tings moved on, continuing their philanthropic work and rebuilding the Shallows as the modernist masterpiece it is today. In their House of the Hamptons, Gary Lawrence and Anne Searchin described the exterior as a study in punctuated rectilinearity. 5 other maids survived, as did the Tings' butler, John M. Finlay, who received a Carnegie Hero Medal for bravery for saving Mr. Green and attempting to rescue Anna. My orphaned grandmother hopped among relations in Queens before marrying my policeman grandfather and starting a solidly blue-collar life in an unnamed house in Nassau, setting the stage for my parents' more whitely-collared life, which eventually included a summer house in Mattituck, one that I am now proud to say includes a paved driveway. I'll never know quite what life was like for Anna or the Tings. My family, like most, falls somewhere between their stations in life. Nor can I know what the East End will look like for my own great-grandchildren, should I have them. But I imagine that she will still be rich in land and sea, a destination for families of all stripes, and for those who love her across the generations, a never-ending project. It's been my privilege to help carry her stones.
Well, that's about it, everybody. Hope to see you in the garden. I want to thank Melissa Leo, Davis Sobel, Dan Simone, Gail Sheehy, Anthony Sosinski, John Aldridge, Alder Fish, Eric File, Brittany Barbite, Crystal Ellis, and the staff of Dan's Papers and all the people that helped make this possible, including Barnes & Noble that provided these wonderful readers for all our winners.